Hey y'all, today we're wrapping up our little section of this unit about delivery. We learned that one of the big communication challenges we can encounter as speakers is that we're not trying to engage our audience with our content by having for lack of a better word, entertaining and relevant delivery. And we talked about verbal elements of delivery, and that was pronunciation and articulation. And then we talked about nonverbal elements of delivery. And those can be split into two categories, vocalics and kinesics. Vocalics are the nonverbals that have to do with the voice. And those are different from verbal elements of delivery, even though they both have to do with like words that you're like a sound you make in your mouth. For our verbal elements of delivery and pronunciation and articulation, those are just like the sound you're making to make sure the word comes through clearly. It doesn't have anything to do with meaning. It's just making sure the word is said in a way that's understandable. But for our nonverbal elements of delivery with vocalics, those are like sounds we're making that are adding meaning to the words that we're saying. And then today we're learning about our second type of nonverbal, which is kinesics, and that's more of the traditional body language that we'll think of when we think of nonverbals. So first, your facial expressions. We know about facial expressions. It's just an expression you have on your face. It conveys emotions and can send messages to your audience in a way that can either aid or damage your ability to get your message across. Like we mentioned previously, if you are saying one thing, but your nonverbals are saying something different, people are more likely to believe your nonverbals. So facial expressions can be a big part of that. If you're saying one thing, but your face is something else, people are going to believe your face. So it's very important to make sure that you control that facial expression. We even talked about this when we did our job interview unit about how even when you're just sitting there listening, you should be thinking about what your face looks like because your resting face is very important for us to try and manage. And big thing to remember is that your facial expressions should just match the emotion conveyed in your words and voice. So we said at the very beginning that just all of your components of delivery should be complementing and supplementing your written content. So same exact thing here. So your facial expressions should match the emotion that you are conveying in your words and in your voice. And next we have hand gestures. These are just physical movements that are used to convey a message. Hand gestures are pretty easy to do for a very simple way to act out what you want to say. So if you're saying, hey, I have three main points. First, I'm going to talk about this. Second, I'll talk about that. And third, I'm going to talk about this. You probably guessed that just then I did a little counting 1, 2, 3 gesture. If I'm talking about the relative like importance of something, I may put my left hand kind of at like shoulder level, and then I say, oh, but this thing is more important, so I'll put my right hand at like a higher level above it to show, oh, a comparison. I kind of did the gesture this woman is doing right here. So you can use your hands to kind of paint a picture for your audience so they can see what you're trying to convey in your mind. For both facial expressions and hand gestures, it's very important, well, honestly, for all of our elements of delivery, it's important to make sure they're purposeful because you don't want to wave your hands around too much because that can be distracting. You don't want to make too many facial expressions because that can be distracting. It can end up sending the message that you aren't wanting to send, and that's not good. So it's very important to plan and practice your facial expressions and your hand gestures. You don't want to be like Ricky Bobby when he didn't know what to do with his hands. You want to plan so you do know what you're wanting to do with these elements of delivery. The last thing I'll say for hand gestures is to make sure you keep them within the box. So that's this idea that there's a box that's kind of starts at your shoulder, goes down to like I guess like where your hips are, and then it extends, I guess, less than your wingspan. So if you spread your arms out completely side to side, it's not all the way to your fingertips. It's somewhere within there. And so if you look at this woman, her arms are too high. It's like, okay, like that maybe like it shows that once it's probably okay because like I said earlier, if you're trying to convey the importance of something relative to something else, that could be helpful. But if all of her gestures are outside the box, that's distracting. Or if her gestures are too low and they're down here, that's distracting. If your gestures are too big, we're having a hard time focusing on your facial expressions and on your hands. And also it's just distracting from the words you're saying too. So keep your gestures within the box, but also make sure they're big enough to be visible to your audience. So this one right now, her elbows are tucked in very tight. Maybe she's saying something like, oh, keep something close to you, and she's making a tucking in gesture. But if her elbows stay in the entire time, her gestures are going to be very small. So even right now where you're sitting, make that same gesture she is. And point at something across the room, or try to make a counting gesture, but keep your elbows very tucked in. So like for me, at least, my shoulders are very like kind of like hunched up even. My elbows, I'm just like, oh, I feel like a little T-Rex trying to make hand gestures. And that's not good for public speaking. And so keep your arms within the box, yes. But if you make a gesture, like you can move your elbow out, I encourage it. Make sure that your gestures are big enough to be seen, and they're getting the job done that you're wanting them to. So keep your gestures within the box, but of course, make them big enough to be visible to your audience. The next thing I'll say about hand gestures is that, like I said earlier, the easiest way to do them is just kind of act out what you're saying. And so if I'm talking about counting something, I'll count off on my fingers. Another big thing to recognize is that you make sure that you use gestures that have your palms facing upward. You don't want to do palms downward gestures. We talked about this a little bit in our job interview Actually, was it job interview? I think I've been during conflict resolution or conversation skills. Either way, we've talked about this briefly before, but we discussed how pointing a finger can be kind of like an aggressive gesture. And so if you're wanting to like draw your audience's attention to something, or you're wanting to gesture someone in your audience, it's better to gesture with the palm of your hand. It's much more inviting. It's much more warm. It's not as like, aggressive. And so the palm of your hand is a much more great hand gesture to use when you're public speaking. Mr. Michaels, if I don't know if y'all are old enough to have a class with him yet, but he's really great at making a gesture like this. And whenever he speaks, he kind of like uses this gesture a lot, and he extends his hands forward, but still those open palms. And it literally looks like he's like, hey, here's my content. I am presenting it to you. Here's the word of God. I'm presenting it to you. And just like a very cool way to like subtly invite your audience into the message. And it's like, oh, this is for me. Like they're presenting it to me. So having your palms open is a really good thing to do when you're speaking. If you talk with your palms down, it can kind of give off the vibe you want to subdue your audience. So even think about like a teacher who's telling the class to quiet down. They're like, okay, quiet down. And like they do this palms down gesture. Like if you're speaking at a big public event and like everyone's cheering and you are trying to quiet down your audience, then like, yeah, you would do that palms down gesture. Or if you're talking about like, okay, we're gonna attack this enemy, like you're gonna put your palm down because you're subduing that. Um, or if you're talking like, oh, our prices are really low right now, so this is the best time to buy. Like those would be times when it would make sense to use palms down. But if you're giving your whole message and all you do is palms down, palms down, palms down, it can be very like subduing for your audience. For lack of a better word, not oppressive, but just like, hey, here's my message. I'm like giving it to you and you're just gonna listen, like just be quiet. And it's very, even I'm using palms down kind of like subconsciously as I'm saying this right now. And so just using palms down all the time in your lecture isn't really a great thing to do. So palms up is kind of the natural gesture when we're going for. Only do palms down when it's like a purposeful way. Like I mentioned, if you're talking about, oh, like we're gonna attack and subdue this enemy, or we're gonna lower our prices and it's gonna be great. Someone who's really, really good at hand gestures and facial expressions is this speaker named Victor Antonio. In these videos I have on these slides, he gives this speech. Well, it's actually the same speech. So on the left side, and he has the video, but not the audio from the speech. And so you can watch it, and he's doing a voiceover, and he's talking about like all the purposeful ways that he's using his facial expressions and his hand gestures. So it's really cool because you're watching him give the speech and you're hearing him like process through his hand gestures and his facial expressions. Then in this video, it's the actual speech itself. And so you can actually see, oh, he's making this facial expression because he's saying this thing, and he's doing that hand gesture because he's doing that thing. And you can see how beautifully they fit together. I think he uses quite a lot of hand gestures, quite a lot of facial. I don't want you all to see this speech and think that that's what like my standard is and what I think that we should all speak like. No, because everyone speaks differently. We learned about this with communication apprehension, that yeah, there are better and worse ways to speak, but not a right and a wrong way. And so when I show you all these videos, I don't say this is the only way to use hand gestures and facial expressions. No, of course not. But he is a very model for how to use these purposefully and effectively in a speech, and also shows that you have to practice, 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 because he didn't just wake up and walk up on stage and go, all right, I think I'm gonna make some facial expressions. No, like these are all very clearly, carefully planned out. So what I want y'all to do, you're gonna pause this video, watch this video first, the one that says storytelling, body language, hand gestures, and you're gonna watch that video first. Take a few notes on your computer as you're watching it, or you can do them on paper on your phone. Doesn't matter to me. Just jot down some notes somewhere about the things that he points out about, like, oh, it's important to do this, it's important to do that. After you watch this video, then watch this video, the one that says success is a process. Watch that one, and then you can actually see, oh, he makes this facial expression, and then here's like the words that went with it. And he made this hand gesture because he was saying this thing. So point out where you think he had some really effective hand gestures and facial expressions. And then you're going to include, on Google Classroom, you've probably already commented the roll call by this point, but you're also going to comment and just share a few observations you made from this video. So you might say, oh, I thought it was really effective when he said this and made this gesture. Excuse me. All right, so you're going to pause the video, watch this one first, then watch this one, and then share your observations on Google Classroom. All right, and then last slide we're going to go through for today. Our last nonverbal element of delivery under kinesics is posture. Now, when we think of posture, we often think of just like, oh, like standing up straight. Well, that's good posture, but that's not really all that posture is for public speaking. So posture refers to the general position of your body to the audience. If you've already watched the Victor Antonio videos, you'll notice that he makes sure that he's facing multiple parts of his audience at different times. He tries to engage the whole room. And he made sure he only turned his back to them once he was done saying a thought, and he gave them a laugh break so he wasn't trying to actively engage with them. So it's how you're positioning yourself to the audience. So think about like when we're in class, if you can remember what our classroom looks like, if I'm sitting behind my desk and I'm lecturing from there versus when I'm like standing in the corner behind the podium and I'm much more out and like physically engaging you guys, there's definitely a difference I've noticed in the way that we listen. Just because if I'm behind my desk, it's okay, I'm sitting down, so you see a lot less of me. I'm not the center of attention, so you have a lot more to get distracted by. But if I have positioned myself closer to y'all, I'm in closer proximity, you can see more of me, then it's a much more commanding presence. And so posture is really important. So again, it's not just standing up straight, it's position of your body to the audience, but it's also conveying an attitude. So like if and your parents and grandparents have probably told you, oh, like don't slouch because you might look lazy. Or if someone walks in, they're standing up really straight, it's like, oh, they look confident. Like when we talked about in Unit 3 about job interview stuff and those power poses you do before and during the interview, those are postures that convey an attitude. So if you maybe have poor posture, you're slouching, then you might look insecure or uncomfortable. But if you stand up straight, you can look confident. You can also utilize posture on purpose. So we talked about with volume and tone and rate that you would change those throughout your speech to convey something different. So if I'm telling a story and it starts out really happy but then gets really sad, then my tone would indicate that. So my tone would sound really happy in the beginning as well, and then my tone will get sad at the end. Same kind of thing with my posture. If I'm maybe telling a story and I'm talking about how like, man, I was like in a really dark place. I was in a really bad mood all the time. Like I might like even just now saying that I kind of like threw my shoulders forward a little bit. I was like, man, I was in like a really dark place, like looking down physically. And so using your posture, like really show your audience that mood that you are feeling as you're talking about it can help match that tone and really reinforce the message to your audience. But when you're not using posture purposefully and you're just standing there to your audience, the key is to be comfortable, but to be confident. So don't be stiff, but also don't look lazy either. So just stand up straight, but make sure you have your hands accessible to you, so don't stick them in your pockets because that could look like you're trying to hide something or like you're uncomfortable. Don't put your hands behind your back. Obviously, don't cross your arms. I think we all know that it sends a very closed off attitude. So have your hands accessible. Don't just floaty hands hold them. So maybe you can clasp them in front of you, or if you'll have note cards because you're giving a speech, you can hold your note cards. But just make sure they are accessible. So be comfortable, but be confident. Have your hands ready to go for hand gestures. Don't cross your arms. Good posture is going to be relaxed and allows you to make use of your hands when needed. And keep your shoulders square to the audience. So what that means, if you kind of think about the way Victor Antonio spoke, like he moves around a lot, but the way he moves, he's trying to face the audience differently. Even if you're standing still, you can do this. If you try and think back to the way that I've lectured, it's like, yeah, I stand towards like the right side of the room, towards like the Shrek side, because that's where I'm not in the way of the projector. But I'm not just facing the Team Pluto table and the Team Hercules table. I'm also turning to face the Team Stitch table, also turning to face the Team Forky table. So I'm making sure that I'm pivoting to make sure that I am like facing everybody. So yeah, like turning your head is good to look at everybody, but even like turning your shoulders is so much more engaging because like, hey, I'm fully here. I'm talking fully to you. It's much more dynamic also with that motion. And obviously, y'all can know like if you have some kind of podium in front of you, that is there to hold your notes. It's not there to hold you. So don't lean over it. Because even look how small she's making herself. Like she's scrunched in. So you don't want to do that. You want to stand up and be powerful. You want to cross your arms and just kind of like throw your head around. Because that just looks like a very like you're insecure, like you just don't care. So even the way that you're holding your head is part of your posture. And then, of course, this guy, like, he's making himself small. Like, he's holding onto an arm, so he doesn't make a hand gesture with that. He's looking down. He's very kind of like, ooh, scrunched up. So these are not good postures we want to convey. They're not purposeful or not powerful. So just like our facial expressions, even when we're just standing there, we have to be aware of what message we're conveying as we're just standing. And that is that for our verbal elements of delivery and our nonverbal elements. Yeah, if you haven't already, go back and watch these videos. If you haven't already, make sure you get your present the psalm activity completed and turned in tonight before 11:59 p.m. And that's all I've got. Y'all have a great day.